Hey Grant, welcome. How you doing?
Not too bad. How are you?
Yes, I'm all good. Thanks. Thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. How's the audio quality?
Yeah, perfect. Sounds ideal.
Good.
Good. Well, yeah, thanks for joining us today. We're great to, I guess, kick off with where Grant started in life. Talk us through where you grew, went to school, that sort of thing, and eventually how you led into your earlier career at Four Frontiers and Antarctic Broadband, I think it was.
Well, sure. So, I mean, that goes back quite a ways. So I was born and raised in a small Canadian town in northern Ontario called Sault Ste. Marie. It's a lovely town, beautiful nature all around it. But Canadian, born and raised. I went to I went to school initially. University. My undergraduate was in aerospace mechanical engineering at Carleton University, which is in Ottawa, Canada. And following that, I was going to go to CU, University of Colorado Boulder, to get into bioastronautics at the graduate level. But I had a friend who convinced myself I couldn't call myself an aerospace engineer if I didn't put things in air and space. So I joined a microsatellite laboratory in Toronto, Canada, instead called the Spaceflight Laboratory at the University of Toronto. After I finished my grad work, I actually stayed there as an employee, switched from being a mechanical engineer to an electrical engineer, and then did, which is, a totally organic transition. Did and then worked my way up through that. But the stops along the way, you asked about a company called Four Frontiers. That was during my a very heavy phase of Mars interest for me. And there was a group at the time that were trying to do, a fully funded uh, zero deficiencies baseline concept for what an early Mars settlement would look like. And I said, "Oh, that's cool." And wait, you're going to pay me money that to do it? Oh, that's even better. Which actually is a funny story because trying to explain that to the border patrol officer when you're, coming to the United States, like, what are you
Yeah.
doing in the States? Oh, I'm going to study Mars settlement. And he looks at me and says, "But we've never been to Mars, have we?" And anyway, then 45 minutes later, I found myself in secondary screening. Anyway, that was a lot of fun. But that was a quick little stint and first foray into working with multidisciplinary team on some really cool projects. Antarctic Broadband is an interesting one because it actually fell out of work I was doing at the University of
Yeah.
Toronto Spaceflight Laboratory, and the predicate of that was, hey, there are researchers in the Antarctic that are underserved by the data services available to them. Getting data on and off the continent was very difficult. And this was something that was done as a result of an initiative in Australia. So got to go down under several times to set up a ground station there, build some Pathfinder satellite spacecraft, but the funding on that ultimately fell through. So it wasn't consummated the way that we wanted it to. But yeah, little fun little stops along the way. But yeah, so many of those early opportunities came out of the University of Toronto, one way or
Yeah.
another, and the spaceflight laboratory there.
Nice. And
So that
fast
was
forward.
those were the early days,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely. No, awesome. And fast forwarding to today and the company that you founded, Gravity Lab. Could you just tell us about what do Gravity Lab do, and how do you guys fit into the space the space ecosystem, and where do you see the company sort of going or evolving over the next 5 years?
Right. So Gravity Lab was, yeah, I think I talked a second ago about wanting to do bioastronautics at
Yeah.
CU when I was, almost 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago now. Ooh, I don't want to think about that. But this is a company that, I dropped the anchor on human life in space 20 years ago, and maybe the chain just pulled taut 3 years ago when we founded Gravity Lab. The point of Gravity Lab is to understand whether or not there are gravity thresholds below which people might fail to successfully adapt to the spaceflight environment. And in particular, if we're talking about long-term human space settlement, if we're talking about millions of people living and working in space, which I think is the Jeff Bezos rhetoric, which I'm fond of, we're talking about having babies. And
Yeah.
the thing that is whispered in many corners of the human spaceflight community is, in reduced gravity environments, we're just not sure if we can do it. And there is anecdotal evidence, but not significant research into thresholding effects that are associated with different gravity levels. And this is a question of profound significance for the future of human civilization, if you believe our future is in space.
Yeah.
If we find that below, let's say a third of Earth gravity, below a third of Earth gravity, we can't successfully adapt, or it's extremely challenging, then a destination like Mars is still very much on the table, but the moon isn't. If we find that that threshold exists closer to, let's say, 50% of an Earth gravity, then it drives us towards a more O'Neillian type vision of free space colonies where we can do spin gravity and accommodate individuals a little bit better, or it drives our research into different countermeasures and different approaches. But there's no mundane answer to these questions. The space community is so often obsessed with how do you get there, they're not thinking about the how do you stay there problem. So Gravity Lab was founded to really interrogate these problems, but to do it in a very low cost way, using small satellites initially that can deploy very, very long arms, big pendulums, and then insert themselves into a spin end over end, and using that spinning, that controllable rotation, be able to dial artificial gravity up and down like a thermostat, so that we can explore and potentially exploit commercially the unique characteristics of gravity as a spectrum. And so we looked at ourselves as being a low-cost pathfinder to help de-risk future human activities, long-duration human activities in space.
Wow, that sounds absolutely incredible.
Well, it's been interesting because that's a weird spot to be in. It is right in between, what would be an exciting investment, but it's not necessarily compatible with a venture capital model. It's exciting research, but it needs to move with a velocity. And the research community has been starved of this capability. It's a major gap in our understanding of human spaceflight physiology. So it's been as challenging technically as it has been, as challenging financially as it has been technically, to get a company like that going. But at the end of the day, it's essential work from my standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And following on from that, I guess on that particular niche part of the space ecosystem, what's your thoughts on the current sort of status of space exploration in general and the satellite sector, and of course what you guys are doing as well with such a unique technology and idea? How do you kind of see all of this evolving over the next 5 to 10 years, and what role do you see sort of Gravity Lab playing in that?
I think that Gravity Lab is like the most of the space ecosystem right now. It is in a state of uncertainty at the time of this recording, which is late February 25. There's a lot of uncertainty about, what is going to happen with NASA, what its mandate is going to be, what is going to happen with return to the moon, whether or not there's going to be a shift in prioritization towards Mars, or whether the resources will even be there to allow that sort of shift. There are a lot of people that really don't know what to build, or are holding their breath, waiting to see if, a SpaceX Starship type future is realized, where launch costs fall dramatically and where upmass and payload capacity grow dramatically. And a lot of people are very bullish about that happening towards the end of this decade. Other people are more skeptical. So there's a lot of flux right now. But at the same time, I think what we're seeing right now is a return of risk capital to the market. The capital markets have come back. There are more space investments, it seems, in the last half year than there had been in the preceding few. There are more and more business plans that I've noticed personally, anecdotally, being hinging on the success of ultra heavy lift vehicles like Starship and New Glenn to a lesser but not significantly lesser extent. So that'll be really interesting. And then of course it threatens to be the era of the mega constellation. The only SpaceX has really genuinely pulled that off so far. It's a really interesting time. In terms of how a Gravity Lab type company fits into it, there are absolutely manufacturing capabilities in space that are really interesting. And I think you see pathfinders like Varda really starting to demonstrate the commercial viability of crystal growth and microgravity. Where you can dial gravity up and down like a spectrum. You can do very interesting things with smart particle crystallization. There are in space manufacturing of pharmaceuticals in particular looks really interesting to me. There's, of course, obviously the enduring defense interest in using space as the ultimate high ground. That's going to continue to be, I think, stable funding for companies that engage it for the foreseeable future. Um, for me, though, it all comes back to seeing human space development. And I still think we're a ways away from doing that in earnest, but I hope I'm wrong. Um, so I wish that I had a more definitive answer to you, but I think so many things have been thrown into chaos at the time of this recording that I
Yeah.
really don't know. But, out of uncertainty comes opportunity if you can see it.
Yeah, absolutely. Why is it, do you think that, because to my knowledge, there isn't a huge plethora of companies that are doing this stuff that you guys are doing at Gravity Lab, and looking at not the how do we get there, it's how do we sustain once we get there. So I know obviously you've got companies like Vast that have done the artificial gravity thing with their space station. You guys are doing looking to something similar as well. So why is more companies not looking into this? Why is there more, do you feel, more of a kind of a, not an obsession, but it's like, how do we get there? How do we get to me? How do we get to Mars? Why are not more people looking at, okay, once we get there, how do we stay there?
Well, I think that there are there's a large fraction of there are a large number of researchers and academics who are indeed doing that groundwork, but funding is
Yeah.
limited for it. And at the end
Mm.
of the day, the question is can you wrap a venture scale business around this sort of proposition? The reason that I gravitated to, no pun intended, to doing these sorts of flights with small spacecraft is because they're not as capital intensive.
Yeah.
If you do look at companies like some of the space station companies, Vast as the example you used, what they've built is gravitics as well. What these companies have built are really impressive, but artificial gravity and that sort of research is, I think, further down the roadmap for them now, because they need to get flight heritage and get a toehold with their modules, as microgravity commercial space stations in the near future. So I think I mentioned earlier, we kind of live in a gray zone ourselves at Gravity Lab, between what is compatible with a venture funding model, and what could be commercially viable but isn't quite yet. So I think it's really just a question of trying to find the money to solve a problem that is still just a little bit outside the time horizon of where investors typically want to deploy capital and see a return on that investment.
Yeah. I guess it's waiting for kind of that side, the VC, the PE market, to kind of catch up to it. Once they catch up
Yep.
to it and realize, then they go, okay, yeah, we can see this as an investment.
And so we've had to be creative in terms of our
Yeah.
business model by embracing some of the manufacturing opportunities that I touched on earlier, because ostensibly the difference between being too early and being wrong is nothing. And I was fortunate enough to be the CTO at a company called Deep Space Industries, and when about 10 years ago, a little less than 10 years ago, and we were all about space resources, asteroid mining in particular.
Yeah.
And we expected there to be an ecosystem that would evolve, that would prompt it and accelerate it. And it didn't come to pass. It hasn't come to pass yet. So we were too early, and we correspondingly had to figure out the ways to, become, instead of the resource company, become the pickaxe and shovel company and sell tools to people to keep the business going. So it might be a little early still for people to really embrace solving these problems, but that's the opportunity. Is you find one person that has that vision, and you're off to the races.
Yeah.
It's going to be an interesting few years, but I think now is the time to get in front of these problems, because there is a lot of work to do. There are thundering uncertainties
Yeah.
associated with human space physiology.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I don't think you have any challenges with this question. Obviously, you've clearly got a passion for the sector and have for many years. But now that you've been immersed in it for so many years, involved in the space sector, what is it you've come to love most about being in the space industry? Obviously, you've been through the academic side, the research and development, being at sea level, and now having your own company. What is it you love most about the space sector?
I've had to ask myself that, and refresh myself on that from time to time, because I've gone through, just like everybody else, the ups and downs and the highs and lows of it. And when I look back at what I've enjoyed most in the past and what I look forward to most is, it's it's not a grand answer. It's, I like doing cool stuff with cool people.
Yeah.
I like I used to ask myself, what would make me tap dance into work, or what makes it feel like not work. And it's really the people you get to work with. You know, when when I've worked alone, it's when I've been at my worst. When I've worked with other people, that's when I've been at my best. And I just like to do cool missions with interesting people. I've got all kinds of rationale. I can tell you all the reasons that we should fall in love with space, and I can give you all sorts of romantic visions about it. And when I
Yeah.
was young, the book that inspired me most at a younger age was Cosmos, Carl Sagan's Cosmos. And you flip through that book, and there's so much grandeur in it, so much exploration of the universe. But you can tell a lot about a person when you take their favorite book, you drop it on the floor and see what page it naturally opens to. For
Yeah.
me, I drop that book on the floor, it opens to the spaceship page. Like, I
Yeah.
like to build spaceships. I like to do
Yeah. Yeah.
missions with fun people. But cool missions with fun people is what it comes down to.
Yeah, absolutely. I was literally just having this conversation with the Space Team guys on the last podcast episode, and they said that it doesn't feel like work because they love it. They love working with the people. They're passionate about it. It makes it very easy to get out of bed in the morning. And like when they're doing all nighters and working through the night on stuff, it doesn't feel like work. So they kind of mirror the same. That whole thing you said there, the noise around tap dancing into work, that's exactly how they feel. And I get the impression most people in the space industry feel that way.
Well, and I haven't always loved it. It would
Yeah.
be, I'd be whitewashing it social media style if I
Yeah.
portrayed this as being a glorious journey of continuous victory. It hasn't been. It's been,
Mm.
a very, very roller coaster ride. And there've been a lot of lows. And so, I'm continuously asking myself exactly that. When things are not going well, what would re-energize me? And it's almost always, it has to be both. It can't just be great people in a mundane project, because then they just become people that you spend half your time complaining with. You might love them and you might have a good laugh, but you're getting nowhere.
Yeah.
But you can get anywhere without good people, no matter how cool the mission is. So, to me, I think you need both to love it, you need both to nurture the love that you have of what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about the future again, one of the main motives around starting this whole podcast was to try and make all of space accessible for everyone. Try to, I guess, raise the curtain, whatever term you want to use, demystify the space sector. And what would you say, in your opinion, what do you feel we could and should be doing differently at kind of, in the classrooms, in schools? I'm talking about elementary too, not just college, university and stuff, but what could we be doing more to try and encourage the next generation more to kind of consider space as a career? Because I still talk to friends and family now. I've only been doing this for 7 years, but as soon as you talk about space, the immediate perception is astronauts, rocket science, astrophysicists. So is there anything you think we could be doing more at that kind of, I guess, grassroots level, if we can call it that, to spread the message and make space more accessible?
Well, I think that, well, first of all, to get people excited about, people have to believe that there is going to be a future.
Yeah.
So it's a tough time. A lot of people are really scared right now, and a lot of what we get excited about in space is exploration. It's getting out there. It's about the excitement. And I've always loved I think it was I'll mispronounce his name, but Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the quotation that, if you want to build a ship, don't don't drum up people to collect wood, and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the immensity of the sea, or something like that. But it's the inspiration component gets lost so often, and like, we have to articulate a why. There's always got to be a why. And to a point that you made a second ago, a lot of people aren't aware that space can be a real career outside of just becoming an astronaut or just
Yeah.
becoming a rocket scientist. We're and space people ourselves. We're stuck in an echo chamber a lot of the time. A friend of mine points out that a lot of people just don't coming up through school don't see that this is a real sector where you can have a real job. Even though you can look at all sorts of grandiose numbers about what the global annual space product is. One way or another, it's measured in the billions. It's a question of whether it's measured in the tens of billions or the hundreds of billions. But there are all sorts of space jobs that aren't. I'm going to be an astronaut. I'm going to be an astronomer. I'm going to be a rocket scientist. And I think that message needs to get out more. More concrete examples, more like I applaud what you're doing because you get the stories of people, and it's other people's stories that have always been most compelling to me.
Yeah.
Like I get fascinated by the human aspect of the journey. Like I can sit there and I can talk to you about the rocket equation, or I can talk to you about esoteric aspects of orbital mechanics, or I can tell you about the person who did this stuff. Like I was just parenthetical aside, I was a terrible math student when I was younger, and the book that got me really engaged and prompted me to do better at math was called Fermat's Enigma. It's a Simon Singh book, and it was about solving Fermat's last theorem, but it was told from the standpoint of all the stories of the individuals who tried to tackle the problem. And the history of the people involved more than the problem itself, which is intrinsically interesting, but sometimes you can't get engaged unless you know about the people that chased it. So I think as an industry, we got to get better at telling our stories and anchoring and again showing people that space could be more than just being an astronaut. I'd still like to be an astronaut, by the way, but but I'd rather buy the ticket than do the legwork.
Yeah, do all the hardcore training. Yeah, no, absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And you mentioned something a few minutes ago around like the social media whitewashing. That was kind of what I wanted to touch on next, and you've kind of alluded to it a couple of times. But what would you say, with all these social media, whitewash posts and all the rest of it, everybody sees the finish line, right? Everyone sees the end product and the all the highs, never the lows. They don't see the grind, the sacrifice, the hard work, the hustle that goes in behind that. So what would you say, career to date so far, what's been your biggest lessons learned? And that can apply to when you were in, as an operator, but also co-founding your business now. And on the other side of that coin, what would you say is something you're most proud of and your proudest achievement to date?
So, I mean, from the lessons learned standpoint, there are just so many examples.
Yeah.
There's so many ways that I have failed. I like to, you like to think of them as setbacks. I was going all the way back to the beginning. I was a high school dropout. I dropped out of high school for a year, and it was actually a space book that got me to re-engage and get back to school. There's Robert Zuprin's The Case for Mars, actually. I got that off a bookshelf. I read it almost in one single big push, and then I went back to school and went from being a terrible student to being a pretty motivated straight A student, and never thought engineering would be for me. Again, said terrible math student, everything. So people are so terrified of failure that they don't talk about this enough, but it's so interesting. I think and then probably professionally, the biggest common theme that I've had, because it's happened a few different ways, is like you just hate letting people down that you encourage to join. You go out and you try to build a company, and you build a team, and you try to build the best team you can of highly motivated people. And sometimes you for one reason or another, you either can't get the funding for them, or to keep it going, or you can't help them turn the corner. You can't get the organization to turn the corner strategically, and you've got to let them go. And then these are people that you're close to, and you brought in specifically to fight side by side with you. And when those relationships end, whether it's through fallings out or because you couldn't sustain them financially, or business failure, personal failure, whatever, letting people down is painful. It's inevitable. The only way to be universally immune to that is to universally not try at things. But yeah, that hurts every time you got to do it. I think lessons learned for me personally is, and this is a theme across personal and professional life, is um, ask for help and be straightforward with people about where things are at. Every time I've tried to protect somebody from something, it's bitten me in the ass. So excuse my language.
Yeah.
Every time I've tried to isolate or protect under the guise of protecting people from the hard realities, it comes back to bite you.
Yeah.
And then it makes things worse. You can trust people enough to be honest with them about where business is at, where you're at, how much support you can give them. Be honest with them about how much support you need from them. Be more trusting of people. Be more generous with trust, and give people credit that they can make their own decisions. You don't have to protect everybody from the world. It's a very parental instinct as well, and I'm still learning that lesson too. I've got 2 children, and I'm still trying to figure that out. So
yeah, me too. I've got 2 daughters. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the big lesson. Those are the big lessons for me anyway, and those are some of the failures that come to mind anyway. And there are so many specific examples that fill up your entire podcast, but let's not do that.
Yeah.
And I guess you asked, I think, about the biggest win or something along those lines.
Achievements, yeah.
So I've been very fortunate. Riffing on the same thing, I've been able to work with some great people that have helped me do some really cool things. Probably what I look back on with the most fondness was actually probably the time I spent at Rocket Lab. I was really lucky enough to be employee number 1 and the chief engineer for their space systems group, and which has now grown to be incredible because of incredible and much smarter and more capable people than me. But yeah, I got a chance to make some key hires there, lead the first mission of their Photon platform. We won the capstone launch contract, which really helped set the groundwork for the exploration program that Rocket Lab's been able to do. And the predicate of that is really, it's a space program for the rest of us, a larger number of smaller, low-cost missions to really get out into the solar system and explore. It was really a source of pride to know that some of the people that I was able to bring in there were way better than me, or are still there and growing it, to see it be successful. That's usually, I think, the broad theme of the things that I've been most happy with are, one day I hired this person and they went on to do something really great. I'd love to say that I turned this wrench, or that I single-handedly did X, Y, or Z, but it's never been that way. I think, and its success comes not the way you want it a lot of the time either. But I never thought I'd look back on my career and think the most important thing I did was hire great people. But I think at most of the places I've been, I've made 1 or 2 great hires that went on to do really great things, and that's special to me.
That must be a mind bender, being employee number 1 at Rocket Lab and seeing where they are now, what they've gone on to be, and all its success and everything else, and just seeing that must be crazy to know that you're integral part of that.
Well, I mean, I think I was just one small part of it in the beginning. But again, you hire 1 or 2 key people and their effort multipliers, and away they go. And
yeah.
So I still stay in touch with those early people, and just love hearing how well they're doing, and it's just exciting. But yeah, it's always been that way. It's like a riffs on an earlier answer to an earlier question. It's about the people.
Yeah, amazing, love it. And for anybody, I guess, talking about that, what we've been discussing in this podcast, that kind of whole journey of getting here, for anybody that's kind of listening to this podcast, was there any kind of resources or anything that you tapped into that you would say, helped you, supported you along the way? You're clearly a people person, I think, working in that sort of community and team type feel. But were there any specific resources or mentors that helped you kind of transition into the space sector? Anything that anyone's listening to this podcast now that still has that perception we've been talking about, right? That it is just all astronauts and astrophysicists, that you'd encourage them to kind of tap into to help them and support them get into the space sector if they still feel it's beyond their reach.
Well, I think in general, the best advice I ever got was to get out there and network and meet people.
Yeah.
And if you ask people for help, they'll give it to you if they're able to. And if they're not, usually they'll tell you, or they'll say, I'm not sure I have the time to support you or that I can help you, but here's someone who can. And building your network is the most important thing early. If you don't even know how to do that, we live in a world where you can get pointers on how to get started online. Like the entire human history of knowledge is at your fingertips in a little box that sits in your pocket all the time. I call it the anxiety box. Other people call it a smartphone, whatever. But for me, just reflecting on the key moments, it's been a combination of a few great books, some really great mentors that I met through networking, and a few good, and some luck as well. But I'm certainly the transformational books for me were certainly Pale Blue Dot and Cosmos by Carl Sagan, Case for Mars by Robert Zubrin, High Frontier, Gerald O'Neill, and those were the formative books for me. Also Black Holes and Time Warps by Kip Thorne. These are very cool books that I ingested relatively young, that inspired me. But one of the things about all of those books, except maybe Pale Blue Dot, but all those books talk equally about the individuals involved. There's a narrative that, and then this guy did these things and that was really cool, and here's his history. I had the privilege, like I tossed myself at a relatively young age into getting into space advocacy. That can be a mixed bag. Advocacy groups in general are tricky and flaky and always in a state of transition. But it was through doing space advocacy and trying to host events myself that I met a person become both one of my mentors, best friends, and ultimately hired me to work for him for a little while. A guy named Daniel Fabers, the CEO of Orbit Fab. He really helped. You meet people when you're networking. You meet people who are even better networkers, and then they expand your network in turn. But was able to have a lot of really hard and frank conversations with him, and helped steer my career quite a bit. I had the benefit of a lot of good mentors that are more subject matter experts. But always, I was always looking for a mentor, and I still am. I still look for people that I can learn from. Get networked. Find mentors, read good books, read voraciously. It's not, I think that the advice I would give is it's not beyond your reach. It really isn't. People usually are self-limiting. It's usually I forget, there's a good quotation to that effect, but don't limit yourself, and also accept that every now and then you might embarrass yourself or fail, because that's just part of it. Every now and then you'll meet somebody who's a jerk, and they'll discourage you, but it's just part of life, right? So I don't know if I've done a good job of answering that question, but that was really my answer. Was I read a lot, I tried to meet a lot of people. And when I needed an assist on something, I'd ask for it.
Absolutely. I think that the mentors thing has been a common theme for people that I've spoken with.
The other one last thing I would say on the topic of books. Best book I read coming up through college in undergrad was Advice for Rocket Scientists. I can't remember the author. I think it's Longuski. Okay. But Advice for Rocket Scientists, and it's basically so you want to, and it's broadly applicable advice, but a lot of it is here's how the rules of being in school do not apply to the rules of the real world. For example, you can't get promoted above your boss. Don't do an end run around them. Don't, all the stuff you do to your classmates to jockey
Yeah.
for position or whatever in school don't work very well in the real world. Or
Yeah.
you're not going to get a lot out of reading tech memos when you get your first job. Go and talk to the subject matter experts. Or if you want to do research, you've got to go deep into it. But if you want to cultivate a big picture perspective, it'll take you 2-3 years to learn 80% of a discipline and another 10 to learn the last 20%. And now you're an expert and you're kind of stuck. So be careful what you're good at. So that advice for rocket scientists, and I usually always have a copy of it so I can give it to somebody. And I just gave away my last one a couple of months ago. So I got to read up on that. I got to reorder that. But I can't believe I almost forgot to mention that book. So I wanted to hammer that one home.
I love it. Love it. And I was going to say I think a lot of people probably struggle at different parts of their life to identify a good mentor. Like I think half of them don't even know where to start in terms of like finding a mentor. So would you say, is it fair to say that you've had different mentors for different stages and different seasons of your life? And when you've had those mentors and they have helped you in those particular moments, you mentioned Dan Faber from Orbit Fab earlier, how do you go about even identifying the right mentor? Like, do those things just happen naturally? Like, how does it? Do you have a certain problems you need solving? Go, okay, this is the best guy. Like, how does that whole process work?
So when I think about that, I think sometimes you stumble into it it's an emergent property of networking. So if you put yourself out there, you will run into people that you can learn from, and the more you learn from them, the more they lock in, the more they'll invest in you. If they're of mentorship of mentoring quality, and I think you transition out of them at a point when you realize that you've become friends, and then they're with you for a long time. And so that's been pretty great. So Dan is the guy that convinced me not to go into bioastronautics, but to go build small spacecraft in the early days for me. When I was building small spacecraft, I was a mechanical engineer and I was trying to transition into electrical engineering. I went to my boss and I said, the thermal control engineering and mechanical design is fun, but I really want to do spacecraft power systems. And he said, no, you do not have the background in that. But I stayed at it and I kept pushing him. I kept bugging him about it. And eventually the lead power system engineer comes up to me and he says, oh, well, we are overwhelmed with the amount of work here. Can you try to do this? And I said, sure. Fast forward 3 days later, I'm like, I have no idea how to do this. Can you walk me through it? All right. And then, he was the subject matter expert and I just kept asking him questions while still being respectful of his time. And so, sometimes it comes to you from networking outside of work. Sometimes it's just the apprenticeship that you find yourself in at work. I think humility is really important there. You have to be, if you want to move into a different field or you want to learn a different thing, you have to allow yourself to be taught. A lot of people think they're hot stuff. And a lot of people want to climb in a vertical direction, career-wise. Accept demotion to grow is also, I think, good advice. You can get a lot done if you don't care about what your job title says. You can learn a lot if you don't care about what your job title says. So I basically accepted myself being busted down to private to be able to do to learn a new field, but that opened up so many more doors for me, and it was what I was excited about. It was what I was passionate about. And I went around and asked questions and I found these amazing few mentors, that one who just taught me how to do soldering, and I remember spending an entire summer just soldering boards. One who taught me how to do a lot of electronics design, and he was a little bit harder on me, and I remember walking away from getting coffee with him and reviewing a design, just chanting to myself, this is what learning feels like, this is what learning feels like, this is okay, this is and then later and my boss at the Spaceflight Laboratory is still one of a great mentor to me. Dr. Robert Z got me started. Pete Beck was amazing to work for at Rocket Lab. He was extremely easygoing, but still, intense and passionate, very open-minded, incredible person to work for. I've just been really, really privileged. And so a lot of the time it falls out of work and you just open yourself up to the lessons that everybody can teach you something. Like everybody knows something that you don't. So everybody can be a mentor in some limited respect to you if you're open to it. That was a long-winded way of answering the question, but hopefully there's
No,
some signal in that noise.
no, it was brilliant. There was a lot of golden nuggets in there, so thank you for that. And I guess taking all of those things that you've mentioned and people that have supported you along the way, if for again for those people, those listeners that are kind of have that perception looking and saying, I really want to get into space, but like you said, they feel like it's beyond their reach. But if you could kind of distill all of that down to one single piece of advice, what would you say to those people that want to get into space this year?
Don't be deterred. It's more than just being an astronaut. Find the intersection of learn as much about the space industry, the space ecosystem as possible.
Yeah.
Look at all of the types of jobs. Identify, try to figure out what problems you want to solve, what you're good at, and what you think you can enjoy doing, and try to find the intersection of those things. The only way to be great at something is to love it. So,
Yeah.
Explore this broad world. Hit up your Chat GPT and say, what are the different disciplines that are,
Yeah.
we've never had better tools to help people research how to start a certain career. And despite, again, there being a lot of uncertainty in the world today about what's next for us, all caps, here as a country, globally as a people, whatever.
Yeah.
The space industry does continue to grow, and it's not particularly well correlated with other markets either. So there's going to be more and more opportunity, and they're going to be weirder and weirder space jobs, right? We're not far away from space janitors. We're diversifying the type of skill sets that we need all the time. So yeah, find something you love. Don't be deterred by the setbacks. And stay intrinsically curious. The biggest setbacks I've had in my life have been when the curiosity has waned. You gotta stay hungry, stay curious, kind of thing, which is pretty tired rhetoric, but it's true. They're out there for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Amazing, Grant. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast episode today. It's been I've loved it. I love the conversation. It's been absolutely fantastic learning about your journey in Gravity Lab. Yeah, thank you so much. It's been awesome.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.